we've got 3 types of connecting strokes in handwriting. And before we do that, I should probably talk about zone dominance. When you see writing, remember I said the middle zone is the day-to-day communication? I see this with a lot of university-age kids now. If I see writing like this, notice how short the T stem is. And if they did, it's just making Anita, and if they did a lower zone letter, it would probably be like this. Really, really no descender on it at all. So this is a dominant middle zone. Don't put the Y on it and make it Anita, it doesn't work. But this is a dominant middle zone, and that's the dominant zone of day-to-day communications. So when you see a really thick middle zone, this is often seen in the writing of people who are about 20 years old because they don't have any long-term plans or goals, the higher zones, and they have no interest in, well, they have the sex interest, but probably not the food and the money one so much. The middle zone is dominant because their day is taken up with their relationships, their friends, social media, all of those things will occupy their time completely. And sometimes you'll see a middle zone that's completely constricted instead. So we get a middle zone, I'm writing small on purpose here. So you got a very high upper zone, a constricted lower zone. If this was a G, this might be large too. But the middle zone being the smallest one, very tiny, this is somebody with no social skills. So the middle zone being huge shows socialization, parties, friendships, hanging out with, going to the mall. That's going to occupy everything. Social media. With a very, very tiny middle zone and a tall upper zone and long lower zone, they have no social skills. Chris will remember this. We had a guy came out to our jiu-jitsu class, very nice guy. He had virtually no social skills. Really, really smart man. And we came up to the pub afterwards, and we're all sitting around and sweaty guys drinking beer and talking about neck cranking and all this stuff. It was awesome. And he's got his computer, and we've got a completely different discussion point going, and he just grabs his computer in the middle of our discussion. Chris, you want to do it?
You want me to be the...
You'll be Paul with the computer here. I'll let you use my iPad. So we're sitting at a table here, and he suddenly wants to talk to... Here, you do here, yeah. So you got Iris sitting there. So we're all like 8 of us sitting around the table, and we're all talking, and he suddenly goes like this.
Hey, let me show you the website I'm working on here.
Yeah, but he's crotch snuggling. He actually has his crotch on the other guy's shoulder, and he's leaning in with his weight on him and showing this stuff. And the poor guy's sitting there just cringing, like, get out of my personal space. And he had no idea that he was doing these massive space invasions with people. Thank you.
You all have no idea how much we wish we were exaggerating about that.
Yeah, thank you. That's correct. You are correct. If anything, he's understated it. My shoulder thanks him for that. So anyway, he had a lot of problems socially. And I said, let me just take a look at your handwriting. Guess what? Constricted middle zones. He missed social cues. He didn't notice things like that. So his graphotherapy was to make his middle zone larger, to open that up so he became more socially aware. The other trait he had was when words are too scrunched together. The distance between words will show you how close you let people get to you emotionally and physically. Typically, a small letter N is a sort of a square. That will show you the usual range, the distance between words. So look at words on your own page. See how close you have them together. If they're jammed together, you can handle people right in your personal space. They might not be able to handle it, but that will be your default. If they are very, very far apart, it can even lead to paranoia. I dealt with one man's handwriting, and on one line of writing, it was something like this. The spaces were ridiculous. And that's exactly what he was like. He was paranoid. He wouldn't let anyone near him. So the distance you put between the islands of these words symbolizes the distance between you socially and relationally with other people. Questions? Yes. You're laughing before you speak. This is going to be good.
Question. So I just want to know, way back to that suicide prevention.
Yes.
Can that be turned around by having them write?
I don't know. That's a very good question. We don't know what can be reversed with graphotherapy by changing the writing. But my guess is, throw it at it anyway. You have absolutely nothing to lose. If you're removing the suicide prevention thing, then perhaps the person, thank you, Dean, the person will lose interest in it very quickly. We don't know the limits of it. We're back to Richard Bandler's line about something entirely different when he said, we don't know the limits of the model, so just pretend there aren't any. And you'll hit the limits eventually anyway. It's self-regulating. Yes?
What about spaces and creativity? The spaces here are not good, but creativity is good.
Creativity is really going to show up with imagination. And imagination is found in loops. So the larger loops, you're going to find people who have more of a creative bent. In fact, let's look at three things really quick. We'll do the Greek E, D, and we'll look at the lower loops. So if someone has big, big lower loops like this, we call those money bags. Those are people who want a lot of friends, a lot of food, a lot of sex, a lot of laughs, a lot of travel. If you've got huge lower loops, you probably have pretty strong ambition, and you're not going to be happy with just a few close friends. You're going to want all kinds of friends all over the place, and you will thrive on that. That will show your social circle, but it will also add to creativity because it's imagination. Unfortunately, if it's the upper loops like that, remember that's the realm of the mind, not the body. An upper loop like that, let's make that let. Huge imagination up there. When it's in the upper zone, this is the person who's just going to think about stuff, but never take action. It's not close enough to the ground level. Loops will always tell you imagination. A number of years ago, I was at a store that's actually called the world's biggest bookstore. It doesn't exist anymore. It was in Toronto, and it was the world's biggest bookstore, which is freaking huge. I went in there to buy a hypnosis text for a course I was teaching, and I forgot about it completely. Here's why. 3 months previously, we'd been in England doing a tour, and I went into the British Museum in London, which amazingly is still free, and I got to look at the writing of some of the greatest writers in history. Charles Dickens, Lewis Carroll, Shakespeare. And over and over and over, I saw one particular trait that amazed me. It was the Greek D, the delta D, also known as the literary D. And it looks like this. Or, let's make it bigger for you, for those that could be like that, even it could be open, but it's starting in the middle, like a backwards 6 starting in the middle. That's the #1 indicator of way with words and writing ability. Of course, when I met Chris, he didn't know anything about graphology. He had this all over his writing, which isn't surprising because he wrote for the Globe and Mail, Canada's national newspaper. He just had the ability, and of course, it showed up in his handwriting. So I put this in my writing when we were in England, and I wrote it every day until it became automatic and forgot about it. So now fast forward to the world's biggest bookstore, picking up my hypnosis text. I came home without it. I came home with 6 hardcover poetry books. Wordsworth, Byron, Shelley, Keats. My wife says, "What's with all the poetry?" I said, "I get it." She said, "What do you mean you get it?" I said, "I just opened it and said she walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes, etc., etc., etc." She said, "You idiot, you put the Greek D in your writing months ago and you forgot." That's right. That's right. And honest to God, I was an English major in school, but I hated poetry. I never got the point. And once I put the D in and it took hold, all of a sudden I understood it. I was reading it like it was a hypnotic induction washing over me and creating all these wonderful images. Went on to create the Valdemar group, which is a Toronto poetry group. And they're all hypnotists too. And the reason we chose Valdemar is it's an Edgar Allan Poe story. Strange facts in the case of Monsieur Valdemar. Valdemar was dying and was put into a mesmeric trance. And he was dead and he was still hypnotized. It was a very, very odd story. So what a great name for a poetry group of hypnotists. I mean, come on. So that's a great one to add. Question?
I'd like to know if you make the D from the top part or from the bottom.
For the Greek D, the delta D, ideally make it in the middle and flow out backwards to the top like that. You can make it straighter if you like as well. I'm just going to go one thing down here. It can be like that. That doesn't matter. But starting in the middle, ideally, even like that. You'll see musicians will do that. It looks like a musical note.
And what if it's from the top?
It's not going to have the same power. Not the same power. And again, these are all done by very, very large numbers. Oh, no disaster that time. Yes?
Does this apply to kids, or do you wait till they're a certain age?
Kids as well. In fact, if you put a crayon in a baby's hand at about a year old and stick a big piece of construction paper in front of them, and all the strokes are towards self, 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 because they're in the development phase, the 0 to 7 years. As they start to get older, 2, 3 years old, the strokes start to go outward as they begin to explore the world around them. There is no time that's too early. We're all taught the Palmer method in North America when we were in school. Those of you old enough to remember, the Palmer method is full of some of the most horrendous writing things you can imagine. They create a nation of jealous, secretive little bastards. I mean, it's a weird trait. Forgive the use of the word little. So anyway, must watch myself. So this is a great trait to have. Now, if you put the Greek D, the delta D in your writing, watch out, because if you have this trait already, which is an E that looks like a backward 3, that's the Greek E. That's the #1 cultural indicator. Someone whose writing is filled with Greek E's, I've had that since I was a kid, that's somebody who will even decorate with books. If they're stuck in a small town with no internet access so they can't get online, there's no libraries, there's no museums, there's no ballet, they will go insane. They need culture and books and literature to be happy. So when you combine the two, you get a Greek D and you have a Greek E as well, you might start liking opera. And that's what happened to me. I found out opera's not as bad as it sounds. And my wife and I got membership. I did a 24-lecture course with Professor Greenberg in Understanding Opera, and my wife and I have subscriptions to the Canadian Opera Company out of Toronto. It's just amazing. Give me 5 hours of Wagner and I'm happy.